Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to another memorable Monday. What a joy it is to be with you this morning on April the 8th. Thank you for those that have been praying for me. I've received one or two messages regarding my voice last week, and it is feeling somewhat better, but I do appreciate even your prayers for me still regarding the voice. It's kind of difficult to think of being a bell ringer if you don't really have a bell, and you rely on the voice. You would have remembered probably, if you've been listening to me for a while, I've used that terminology before, and I say that I'm just the bell ringer at Benoni Bible Church. What that means is that I call people to come and worship the Lord, and that's part of what I do even on Radio Pulpit from Mondays to Fridays, as well as on Skriftelik on a Tuesday. And what a joy that is, because my heart's desire is to have you as the listener worship the Lord. And some of these thoughts that we look at even through Mondays to Fridays is part of that desire, is that you would be turned toward worshiping the Lord. And so let's get into it. So welcome back to Memorable Monday. And we go in Memorable Monday through church history to uncover some of the lessons of the past that also shape our understanding of the present. And today we set our sights on a pivotal moment in the Byzantine Empire. You'll remember that the Byzantine Empire became the Eastern Orthodox side of Christianity, in particular with the capital of Constantinople, which later on would then become Istanbul. Today is known as Istanbul. Many of the churches turned into mosques later on in Istanbul, in Turkey today. But that was all the Byzantine Greek-speaking world at that time. And we're going to be looking at the reign of Emperor Justinian I and his codification of Roman law. You'll just need to excuse me every now and then as I clear my throat. But we're going to explore some of the implications of Justinian's codification in relationship particularly between church and state, and examining historical facts through the biblical lens. And so Emperor Justinian I, he reigned from 527 to 565 AD and is renowned for his ambitious effort to codify Roman law. Now, to codify means to organize and to systematize a set of rules and laws or principles into a coherent and structured document or legal code. Essentially, it involves putting existing laws or regulations into a clear and organized form, making them easier to understand, access, and apply. It's like putting together a comprehensive rule book or handbook that outlines all the rules and guidelines governing a particular area of law or activity. As an example of this, we had a AGM not too long ago as a local church, and there are different rules. There's rules even in our country. There is something called the Companies Act, and then there's something that is called the NPO Act. And churches fall under the NPO Act. And if you have somebody that thinks that the church falls under the Companies Act, they might be applying something from that act to an NPO, which is a church. And so that's in a sense, a codification. So his codification, known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the Justinian Code, I think it's easier to remember as the Justinian Code, aimed to consolidate as well as to systematize the vast body of Roman legal precedents and enactments. And you need to have a precedent in law to be able to actually sometimes enact that precedent. So, for example, what we've gone through in recent years with a state of emergency in the country that we had, there wasn't much precedent because we'd never called such a large countrywide state of emergency like we had during the COVID lockdown periods. And so then it meant that it was more difficult to actually bring legal cases or legal challenges because there hadn't been these precedents. So that's why codification is something that is really so important. And so this monumental undertaking then had these far-reaching implications, not only for the governance of the Byzantine Empire, but also for the relationship between church and state. And this had an impact even into our day. In South Africa, for example, the constitution of our country serves as the primary legal documentation that codifies the fundamental principles and laws that govern the country. And so the Constitution of South Africa, which was adopted in 1996, outlines the framework for the governance of the country, establishing the rights and the responsibilities of citizens, and sets out the structure of the judiciary and other institutions It serves as the supreme law of the land, providing a foundation for the legal system, and then excuse me, and then also guiding and in the interpretation and application of other laws and regulations. So therefore, in South Africa, the Constitution can be considered a form of codification, as it organizes and systematizes the fundamental laws and the principles upon which the country is then based. And so Justinian's codification of Roman law marked the significant shift in the balance of power between church and state. And so under his reign, the Byzantine Empire witnessed the intertwining of secular authority and ecclesiastical jurisdiction. So that means that the church was brought into this because they had started to adopt, they became Christianized in many respects. And so Justinian, influenced by his devout Christian beliefs, actually sought to uphold the supremacy of the church while consolidating imperial control. And so this became actually quite dangerous in many respects. And before codification of the Roman world, the legal system was characterized by this complex and decentralized body of laws and customs and precedents. And so laws were not systematically organized into a single comprehensive code, but rather constituted of various sources of law, including statutes, enactments by legislative bodies, decrees that were issued by magistrates, and legal opinions that were handed down by jurists. And this decentralized system then led to inconsistencies and uncertainty in the application of the law, as different regions and jurisdictions often had their own unique legal traditions and interpretations. And so something that you can see at this time in history was that you have a sense of the church actually making a real impact on what you find in this world at this time. Because the church, and just even having the Bible, was something that started to drive the governments towards actually becoming more coherent in their application of the laws. And because this was a quote-unquote Christian governor, he wanted to see that there was this fairness and righteousness in the laws, but this also meant then the mixing in of church and state. So additionally, legal proceedings were heavily reliant on these oral advocacies and case-by-case adjunctions, and these legal decisions were based on precedent and the persuasive arguments that were presented by advocates, instead of actually having this legal code which helped to keep things truly fair. And so rights and obligations under the law and legal disputes, they were often resolved through negotiations and arbitration, or just local authorities even looking at this. And so this was a centralization type of a process. But overall, the legal system in the Roman world before codification was characterized by its complexities, its diversity, its lack of uniformity. It reflected the diverse cultural and political landscape of the Roman Empire. You'd have somebody that could be put to death for not following one of the Roman gods, etc., before this time. And so Justinian really, his codification was an absolutely massive move inside of church history. It's helpful for us to realize that even the reason that that even today we have countries with constitutions goes back to some of this codification done by Justinian. And even the Constitution of South Africa, when you start to see some of the areas in the Constitution of our country are still impacted by some of the things that we find in the Bible. And that's obviously when a country will be run justly and righteously. So in short, what we see, this idea of Justinian and the codification that he brought an order to the country, but it also brought something of a mixing of the church and the state. And that's where some of the danger came in regard to this. And so this fusion of church and state laid the groundwork for the Byzantine model of what is called Caesaropapism. So Caesaropapism. And in short, Caesaropapism refers to a system in which the secular ruler Typically, an emperor or a king holds significant authority over religious matters, and often includes the appointment of clergy and involvement in ecclesiastical affairs, and this term is commonly associated with the Byzantine Empire, where the emperors exerted considerable control over the church and blurring the lines between secular and religious authorities. And this is where the danger came in, where the emperor wielded significant influence over the religious affairs. Now, what we have in the more Protestant faith, and what we have even at Benoni Bible Church, we have a statement in our statement of faith that says we hold to the absolute separation of church and state, because we see the importance of the church being a voice to the state, but not being underneath the headship, the supreme headship of Jesus Christ alone, and following him alone. And we see the difference in the spheres of authority between what we find in the family unit, the state, and the church. And so while Justinian's efforts aimed to strengthen the unity and stability of the empire, they also raised questions about the appropriate boundaries between secular and religious authority. And so that's why this is such an important topic to look at and cover on our Memorable Monday. And from the biblical perspective, Justinian's codification underscores the complexities of that relationship between the church and the state. While Scripture upholds the principle of submitting to legitimate governance, as we see in Romans 13:1, which says every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist have been appointed by God. But if you go and read from verse 2 and verse 3, you'll notice that Paul highlights the kind of governments that are actually from God, the governments that uphold good and that punish that which is wicked. And we know what is good and we know what is wicked from the Bible. So when you have a government that does that which is bad and calls it good, or does that which is, and actually subverts that which is good and calls it bad, then you have a government that is illegitimately governing, not in accordance with the authority of God. For example, a similar concept could be given. If you have a husband and a wife, and the wife is called to submit herself to her husband, but the husband calls on her to do a sinful act, she is to look beyond her husband and to see the Lord Jesus Christ and honor her Lord. As soon as we are called to do something which is sin, in other words, to do something that we're told in the Bible not to do, or not to do something that's in the Bible that tells us we should do, then we are not to subject ourselves to that kind of a government authority, because that is illegitimate authority. It is not authority that is living itself underneath God. But it also affirms, even in the Bible, the autonomy as well as the authority of the church that is under Christ's lordship. In Colossians 1 verse 18, it says, "And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have first place in everything." And so the challenge lies in maintaining this delicate balance between honoring earthly rulers and then preserving the distinct identity and as well as the mission of the church. And so that's why this is such an important area for us to think about. But thank you for joining me today on Memorable Monday. I look forward to being with you tomorrow on Theology Tuesday, as well as with Script Look tomorrow afternoon. May the Lord bless you. Amen.